Good morning. All right, lesson 6.4, chapter 6, lesson 4, absolute value. So the first thing we're going to do is write a definition. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. Super simple concept. So if we're talking about a number line with 0 in the middle, the absolute value of 3 is 3. So the answer will always be positive. The answer to absolute value will always be positive because distance is always positive. Let's say that you live 5 blocks south of me and you're going to come to my house. You wouldn't say I'm going to walk negative 5 blocks to Miss Jardine's house. You would just say I'm going to walk 5 blocks. Or if you're driving from Indiana to Florida for vacation, you wouldn't say I'm going to drive negative 600 miles on my trip. You would just say I'm driving 600 miles. So distance is always a positive number. So when we're talking about absolute value, when I'm looking at negative 3 and these two lines outside of negative 3, those two lines are representing the words absolute value. So this right here is asking, how far away is negative 3 from 0 on the number line? Well, if I'm at negative 3, I'm going to have to hop back 1, 2, 3 places. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. If you look at negative 10, what is the absolute value of negative 10? If you're sitting at negative 10 on the number line and you have to walk back to 0, you're going to have to walk 10 steps. If you're at 5 and 789 thousandths, what is the absolute value? What's the absolute value of 5 and 789 thousandths? 5 and 789 thousandths. Moving over to the right side, what is the absolute value of 5? If you're sitting at the integer 5 on the number line and you have to walk back to 0, you would have to walk back 5 steps. If you're at negative 2.5, what is the absolute value? 2.5. What is the absolute value of 2.5? If you're sitting at 2.5 on the number line, how far to get back to 0? 2.5. So notice with every answer, the answer to the problem is the exact same number as what we started with, except every answer is positive. If your answer starts positive, it's still going to be positive. If your problem started as a positive, your answer is still going to be positive. If your problem started as a negative, we're going to flip it to become a positive. So all absolute values are always positive. Question, which is closer to sea level? Circle 1. So when we're talking about sea level, that is the point at which we start counting elevation, either above or below. So let's say we have a mountain over here off the coast, and then over here we have a valley. So this valley might be negative 40 meters or 40 meters below sea level. If I was at this point climbing up the mountain, I might be at 215 meters above sea level. So if we're comparing, let me choose a different color. If we're comparing a scuba diver that's 7 meters below or a whale that's 11 meters below, so I'm going to come over here. So negative 7 meters would be here. Negative 11 meters would be underneath that. Which one is closer to sea level? The scuba diver. Which is closer to sea level? So I'm going to erase those two so we can do our next two examples. Choose a darker green. So which is closer, a seagull at 12 meters above or a school of fish at 6 meters below? Well, 6 is closer to 0 than 12 is. So for this one, the school of fish is closer to sea level. So then we have a submarine 40 meters below the surface of the water, and then we have a kite at 35 meters above. Well, 35 is closer to 0 than 40. So the kite would be closer to sea level. Compare. Remember, we've talked a lot about comparing. Comparing means less than, greater than, or equal to. You have to be very careful with these because this is not just comparing integers. This includes absolute value. So we're comparing -5 to the absolute value of -3. Well, first you have to solve for the absolute value of -3, which is 3. So now we're comparing -5 to 3. -5 is less than 3. 12 compared to the absolute value of -1. So we're comparing 12 on the left to 1 on the right because the absolute value of -1 is 1. So 12 is greater than 1. We're comparing the absolute value of 1/5 to 3/4. Well, the absolute value of 1/5 is 1/5, and 3/4 is 3/4. I'm going to use cross products to find out which one is greater. So if I multiply 5 times 3, I get 15, and 4 times 1 is 4. Well, 4 is less than 15, so 1/5 is less than 3/4. 2 compared to the absolute value of -5. The absolute value of -5 is 5. 2 is less than the absolute value of -5. 6 8/10 compared to the absolute value of -8 and 35/100. So we're really comparing 6 8/10 to 8 and 35/100. Remember, absolute value is always positive. So 6 8/10 is less than the absolute value of -8 and 35/100. The absolute value of -4 is 4, and the absolute value of 3 and 90/100 is 3 and 90/100. So 4 is always greater than 3, so that one's going to be greater than. Okay, let's see what we got going on here. Order the numbers from least to greatest. So this is going to be exactly what we did last week, except notice that a couple of these numbers are absolute values. So the first thing you have to do is solve for those. So I like to put a box around the number that I'm actually solving for. So this one is the absolute value of -2, which is 2. I've got -1. The absolute value of 3 is 3. And then I've got 5, 0, and -2. Now remember, every time that we have ordered numbers this year, we always put the original number in the problem in the answer. So even though the absolute value of -2 is 2, when we write our answer, we're going to have to write it as the absolute value of -2. So remember last week when we were doing this together, and I said a strategy that I like to use is highlight all of the negative numbers first, which I actually only have 2. I'm sorry. I've got -1. I didn't see the -2 down here. I've got -1 and -2. So to order, -2 would be farthest to the left, is less than -1. And then I know 0 is going to go between my negatives and positives. So then I've got 4, 2, 3, and 5. Okay, so then my 2 came from the absolute value of -2 is less than the absolute value of 3 is less than 4 is less than 5. And then I like to go back and count how many numbers did I start with and did I include all of them in my answer. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers to order. I ordered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's real easy to accidentally forget one. Okay, so first thing we want to do is solve for the absolute values. So the absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. And the absolute value of 0 is 0. So now I'm going to go through and highlight all of my negative numbers first. So I've got a negative 5 and a negative 1, and that's it. All right, so I'm going to start with negative 5 is less than negative 1 is less than the absolute value of 0 is less than, let's see what I have left. I've got 1, 3, 10, and 15. So the absolute value of negative 1 is less than the absolute value of negative 3 is less than the absolute value of 10 is less than 15. Okay, so I'm going to count. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers to order. I numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I should be good. So let's review again. So this is the comparing. Remember, you have two choices. You can either find a common denominator. So for 3 and 5 would be 15. So on the left side, I would do 3 times 5 and 2 times 5, so that's negative 10 fifteenths. On the right side, I would do 5 times 3 and 2 times 3, so that would be negative 6 fifteenths. If both of the numbers are negative and they both have the same denominator, you're only focusing on negative 10 compared to negative 6. Well, negative 10 is less than negative 6. So negative 2/3 is less than negative 2/5. Option 2, cross products. 3 times 2 is 6, so that would be negative 6. Cross products. 5 times 2 is 10, negative 10. Negative 10 is less than negative 6. Negative 1 and 1/9 compared to negative 1 and 5/6. Option 1, find a common denominator. So for 6 and 9, that would be 18. So on the left side, 9 times 2 is 18, and 1 times 2 is 2. 6 times 3 is 18, 5 times 3 is 15. Since both of our numbers start with negative 1, all you're looking at is the negative 2 and the negative 15. So negative 2 is greater than negative 15. Decimals. Super easy one right here because this is negative 0 point and this is negative 1 point. Well, 0 is greater than negative 1, so that's a super fast one to solve. Again, here you are comparing negative 0.5 to negative 0.3. These other digits don't matter, and this doesn't matter. All that matters is the digit in the tens place. If those two numbers are different, that's all that matters. If those two numbers were the same, we'd have to keep looking at other digits. Since negative 5 is less than negative 3, negative 51 hundredths is going to be less than negative 327 thousandths. So I have two numbers both starting with negative 1 with different denominators. So I'm going to find a common denominator. So for 6 and 8, that's going to be 24. So on the left side, 8 times 3 is 24. 7 times 3 is 21. On the right side, 6 times 4 and 1 times 4. Okay, so now that they both start with negative 1, I'm just comparing negative 21 to negative 4. Negative 21 is less than negative 4. Now this one we don't have to do much thinking on because look at our whole numbers. We've got a negative 1 and a negative 2 sitting in front of those fractions. So my fractions don't matter. I don't even have to look at the 7/8 or the 1/6 because I know that negative 1 is greater than negative 2, and that's all I need to know to compare those two. Last one. Place these in order from least to greatest. Use the number line. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what my greatest number is to put on my number line. And my greatest number is, say I've got a negative 1/2, negative 3/4, 0, negative 2, ooh, look at all of those negatives. Now, the only positive number that I'm going to put on my number line is 1/2. That means that I should not put 0 in the middle. Why? Because then I'm going to cram all these negative numbers together. I'm going to have one little number over here all by itself. So if most of your numbers are negative, you probably want to place 0 somewhere down here. So if that's 0, and I notice that my denominators are 2, 4, and 8. So I'm actually going to choose to count by fourths. So if this is 1/4, then this is 1/2, and this is negative 1/4, whoops, and negative 1/2, negative 3/4, negative 1, negative 1 and 1/4, negative 1 1/2, negative 1 and 3/4, negative 2. So negative 1/2 is the first number that I'm looking for. Negative 1/2 is right here. Then negative 3/4, just to the left of that, 0, negative 2, negative 1/8. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm not sure where that would go, so I'm going to hold off on that one just for a second. And I see 1/2 down here. Okay, so I'm going to pull this fraction out and put it over here. So I see that all my denominators are 4s, but I know that 4 is a factor of 8. Well, if 4 is a factor of 8, then I could convert some of these to be 8s. Let's see, if I converted my negative 1/4, if I did 4 times 2, I would get 8. And if I do 1 times 2, that's 2. Oh, so my negative 1/4 is equal to negative 2/8. So negative 1/8 would go halfway between 0 and negative 1/4. So I'm going to label that one right here. Negative 1/8 would go here. So I'm going to erase this. We'll have space for my answer. So now remember, all you have to do is go from left to right. So the first pink dot is at negative 2, is less than, keep moving down the line from left to right, negative 3/4, is less than negative 1/2, is less than negative 1/8, is less than 0, is less than 1/2. So that would be your final answer. All righty, see you later.